Thank you. So maybe while we're getting ready, just some practical announcements. So talking about hopes and opportunities, there will be a reception at 6:30. So I know that you might be getting tired now. So we will move outside for the reception at 6:30, but we're still expecting the environment minister to join us. So she will be arriving at around 7. So at around 6:30, we will start the reception, and you can go outside and get your glass to drink something. But then once the minister arrives, please come back either to the room, or you can also be upstairs and listen to her short intervention, her short address from the gallery. And then for just a short announcement for our members for tomorrow. So tonight there won't be any opportunity to ask questions to the minister. She's just addressing the reception, but we will have another meeting with the minister tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. So prepare your questions. She will be with us to answer your questions. That also means that it's really, really important that you have to be at the venue at around 8 o'clock for all the registration and the practicality, so that we can start at 9 o'clock with the minister. So make sure that you start on time, given that the venue further outside. So please check again how to get there and to make sure that we're there at 8 o'clock. So as Patrick has just said, we're going to look a bit at what you have been discussing in the breakout groups around the tables. You've given me a hell of a job in 1.5 hours to run through all your points. So I hope I've done justice in summarizing your discussions, but just to make sure that, nothing will be lost. We'll do a full documentation of the conference, and all your points will be covered, and we'll make use of all your points. So don't be disappointed if you don't see your favorite argument now, but I've tried to group it a bit and to see a bit kind of some trends emerging and some patterns across the different policy areas. So let me do the summary, and then let's see if you still have appetite for comments or questions before we'll invite Toni to do the conclusion of the conference. Okay, so let's have a look at our workshop. So you were given 4 questions. The first one was about the opportunities for success over the next 5 years. So I've tried to group it a bit, kind of, let's say, horizontal opportunities and then some more specific opportunities for some of the policy areas. So here's some points that I saw across the board on different tables and which I found particularly interesting. So first and foremost, what came out as an opportunity is that we have the 2030 agenda and the SDGs, and that is a narrative of hope, and that's an opportunity that we should use. Then what came out from several of the tables was that the European Green Deal can be a horizontal and a framework that can also help to create more coherent policies. In particular, if the European Green Deal is paired with a very clear zero pollution, a stronger circular economy and non-toxic environment strategy. That came out from several of the tables. There are also opportunities around the MFF, the EU's budget, if we make it truly sustainable, and if we raise the ambition for policy coherence, also linked to budgetary questions. That was discussed around many of the tables. Some of you also said that they do see an opportunity in the new governance structures of the Commission, for instance, with the role of Vice President Timmermans and kind of his portfolio, and which may hopefully enable him to break down some of the silos, and also the clear message to him to really focus on enforcement, to give enforcement more priority. Another opportunity that I've seen in some of the tables was that there is a new discussion, new momentum to discuss alternative growth indicators to focus on well-being rather than on only economic growth objectives. Linked to that, also that there is a window of opportunity to really change trade policies, to come to a new trade regime. Then from a more, let's say, legal point of view, there are some hopes connected to the fact that the European Court of Justice is backing up hopefully more ambitious interpretation of some of the good policies and laws that we already have in place. And last but not least, there's an opportunity to change the public discourse on regulation and the rule of law in Europe from something which is a more defensive to really showing the added value of having regulation and the rule of law. So these were some kind of overarching opportunities that go kind of the cut across all the different policy areas. And then there's some more that I've picked. So again, it's not from all the policy areas, but just a few, but also some that were reflected in several tables. So there's a clear opportunity on biodiversity. With the global biodiversity debate around the next CBD COP, the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, but also the discussion on the European Biodiversity Strategy. So several tables said that there's an opportunity really here to step up biodiversity, well, the strategy, but also kind of even maybe a biodiversity law with more teeth. Linked to that, there was also an opportunity to really drive sustainable fishing, given the overfishing risk and raising awareness of that issue. Another opportunity is to really up the air quality standards, to align them with World Health Organization guidelines, and also through the revision of the National Emission Ceilings Directive. So that was also reflected in 2 or 3 tables. Linked to that also opportunities through the review of the Industrial Emissions Directive. Several of you saw that as a really strong opportunity. And we've talked a lot about the Common Agricultural Policy. So despite all the criticism and the concerns, it's still perceived as an opportunity. The reform is still underway, and it's still a key opportunity for us in the environmental movement to improve our food system. And also the fact that the farm-to-fork approach is mentioned in the European Green Deal is perceived as an opportunity and a good approach. Now, coming to the next slide. What should the EU do to address environmental challenges? So the list becomes longer, as you see. I'll try to be brief. So clear message, withdraw the one in, one out principle, not a useful approach at all. That came across from several of the tables. Also, the need for an overarching sustainable development strategy that can also be enforceable, to give kind of weight to all SDGs, not just kind of cherry pick a few that we already like or where we already have good European policies. Linked to that, to have to make sure that all new proposals are compatible with the Paris Agreement goals and the SDGs. So be very systematic about that compatibility. Well, the European Green Deal is welcomed by most of you, but all of you that came across from the tables. But there is that concern with the overall coherence between the different policy areas, which links back to the need for that overarching strategy on sustainable development. Well, as we've said, there's concerns with coherence regarding the CAP, but also the questions of promotion of dams, the trade policies, and a few others. Then the EU should also clearly focus on making the MFF truly sustainable, putting in place a conditionality in the EU budget, and make a strong alignment between the European Green Deal and the MFF. More things on the to-do list of the Commission and the new policymakers are a strong a focus, let's say, on implementation and enforcement. So you mentioned, for instance, a stronger mandate for public prosecutors to work on environmental crimes, to really systematically pursue the infringements, and to focus more generally on implementation and enforcement. What was also mentioned on several tables was that the EU really has to champion environmental rights, to truthfully implement the Aarhus Convention, and to put in place a directive on access to justice. At least 5 times it was mentioned that we need an internalization of external costs through pollution and carbon taxes. That was mentioned from those working on chemicals to those working on circular economy and a couple of other issues. There's a need to increase transparency and access to data to really enable us, civil society, and the public to control. And also, there's a need to change the approach of how we regulate industries, that we should really shift the focus on how industries have to provide public goods and services. And then there were a couple of more policy area-focused demands, well, we've mentioned the cap. I'm not going to mention it again, just to move it from industrial agriculture to agroecology. We've been talking, some of you have raised this issue early on, the restoration of natural carbon sinks, and this, of course, has to be funded through the MFF more prominently. Well, what has also been mentioned, not just now on the tables, but also in the panels, was to set better product standards. There's a lot of scope to use product policy, to use also labels, to rule out unsustainable products and planned obsolescence. And to, for instance, when we look at the chemicals policy, to move from this kind of regulating chemicals one by one, but to have a more systematic approach to regulate whole families of chemicals out where necessary. So what are the new partnerships that we should be looking at, new collaborations? That was quite interesting because many of the things came again and again. So what many of you said, that we need better collaboration with communities who are directly dependent on nature and local communities in general. So you mentioned coastal communities, but also touristic regions where there's leverage to push for more ambition, but also with kind of people like anglers who use nature in recreation, but also farmers. So to really work more with the communities, local communities on the ground. Some of you also mentioned that we as the environmental movement have to work more closely with those who are more marginalized and voiceless, and with the movements demanding environmental justice across our region. What surprised me was to see how many of you mentioned that we need to work more with health professionals and the health sector. So I mean, I knew this from our chemicals colleagues working on chemicals, but I saw it on many of the tables that we really have to work more closely with the health sector, also on biodiversity, air pollution, and a couple of other issues. Some of you stated that we need to work more closely with our colleagues in the non-EU countries. So, well, some of our members from non-EU countries are here, so that came from several of the tables, that there's opportunities to work more closely with organizations and stakeholders from our neighboring countries. Then we also need to work more closely with the small and middle-sized businesses, for instance, on nature-based solutions, that was one example, and with progressive businesses in general, also the bigger ones. We're not doing that yet to the degree that we could. Then, of course, there was several mentions that we need to strengthen our work with young people in our organizations, but also to strengthen that link to the green wave and the movements that we're seeing. And we should also, that was something that I hadn't expected, that we should, for instance, also step up our collaboration with, for instance, courts of auditors, prosecutors were already mentioned, and similar institutions. And last but not least, that we have to support whistleblowers across our work. And now to come to the last question, how can we make a difference as civil society? So several of you mentioned that we have to advocate more strongly for the benefits for nature in a broader sense, but not only to business stakeholders, but also, as we just saw, to those regions benefiting from tourism and many others. So you saw that there's many more opportunities to advocate for the benefits of nature, so to kind of have that positive narrative. We have to communicate about the climate and the biodiversity crisis together. I think there's a feeling that at the moment, well, one of the crises is not getting enough attention, and that we have to link that debate more strongly. Basically, all of you mentioned that we need to invest more in environmental education in all levels. And basically, all of you mentioned that there is still that strong role for us to mobilize and to also do public awareness raising from bottom up to the top, targeting the different levels of policy making. Quite some of you also mentioned the role of citizen science through NGOs. One example that you mentioned was to collect data on air pollution, but it really came across from several of the tables. Also, our role in bridging the gaps between science, politicians, youth, and to make concrete proposals is still one of the kind of key roles that you see for us. Some of you also mentioned that we have to use direct democracy instruments much more, such as referenda or citizens' initiatives. Then there's still an important role for us to also reveal the risks, to reveal the bad practices, to take up our watchdog role, the naming and shaming, and to call out greenwashing. So that was also something that you still perceive as one of our key roles of civil society, that we need to ask for transparency and the access to information and data. Then especially from the table discussing the role of young people, there was a clear request that civil society needs to do everything to empower the young generation through different measures, but that we also need to learn from young people and listen more to their demands, and that we also need to help them to strengthen their advocacy work and their access to policymakers. We need to use the courts more, and we can also use benchmarking, gold plating, and sharing more best practices, which kind of links to the first point, which is kind of creating that positive narrative. So that was a lot. As I said, it was a difficult job to try and summarize. I did summarize, though, but it was difficult to kind of, bring it down to just 5 points. It was a bit more than that. So we have a bit more time. So let's see if there's more comments, reactions from your group work. Is there anything that is missing that we haven't talked about at all today that you feel, well, this is the elephant in the room, why is nobody raising that issue? That's also now the time to still share some additional thoughts with us. And otherwise, maybe you have some more thoughts to share with us from all the points on the list now. I mean, how can we really make a difference as civil society? What are the things that you want to share that we should really put our focus on in the next 5 years? So the floor is open. Yeah. Who wants to comment and use the last opportunity today to share thoughts and input?
And while you're thinking, we should probably just say thank you to Patrizia, because pulling together a lot of these things. And also initially, when we had the draft program, we had 21 tables, so we only got down to 15, so it could have been a lot worse. Okay,
So, any more comments? Something that we really missed in the debate today? I have recovered everything.
That's a question, is there?
So we have another Slido poll that Anton has just highlighted. So maybe you also want to answer that one. And while we wait for you to vote, any more comments?
We can also confirm that the Minister Zelena should be here exactly at 6:30.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So. Yes, there's one more comment here.
Thank you. Daniel from Slovakia. I think that this was a talk in more tables, and I'm not sure if you mentioned this point was to broaden the European standards, environmental standards, to all producers which are selling in European market. This is quite important to sustain our sustainability. Otherwise, it's impossible.
Yes, thank you. There was one more here, and then one went back in the front.
I'm not sure if I'm breaching your voting rules, because I just want to make a plug for the health sector. Mike Clark from the UK. I'm not sure how many colleagues here are aware, but the health professional sector now in a number of countries and the international community are identifying climate change as the single biggest threat to human health. And that is starting to affect their policies. And there is a real debate, in fact, some of it's going on today in London, about making COP26 the health COP. And this isn't just about the obvious things about high temperatures and so on. The health community are recognizing that system change is needed. And that includes affecting consumption, it includes affecting the food system. There's a massive overlap with the agenda we've been talking today. And I would really urge people to reach out. And if anyone is interested, I'm happy to make connections through some of the medical journals and health professional sectors in the UK.
Thank you. There was one lady here. Yes, thank you.
Yes, Antje Mensen on the mic. say it without the microphone. Something
Do we have another one?
in the
Oh, yeah.
now it's working. In the challenges or in the opportunities we have, is I would just like to stress, next year is the year of ambition for climate change. Next year we have the Paris ratchet mechanism kicking in, and it is our key moment in the next few years to ratchet up EU climate ambition. And I don't think that was, for me personally, that was not quite strong enough in the slide we just had here. It's something we all have to work together, and it's great to hear about the health community. And I think this is really something we need to focus our work on in the next year. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Nick?
Thank you. Nick Muller from the Nordic Group. I'd completely agree with that. I would say actually that gives increasing the EU's ambition in the run-up to COP26 gives you the hook you want to push for a progressive and better regulation agenda. The only thing I was going to point out is just on the poll, I think you're missing one category of actors here, which is trade unions. I think they are quite an important actor to engage with in order to make sure that the workforce gets the support it needs to be able to do the new jobs involved in a net zero economy.
Thank you. Indeed, I think at least 2 or 3 tables did mention trade unions as one of the actors we need to collaborate with more. Michael.
Thank you, Mikael Karlsson, honorary member of EB. I think one elephant in the room is perhaps, even though on the screen we can see how civil society should do to make a difference, I think what we know that transformations occur in societies. 3 decades ago, I jumped over a wall here in Berlin. The wall is not there any longer due to civil society movement and a lot of other things. The wall wasn't taken down brick by brick, it just went down in a few months. Following a lot of events, a very complicated development. Now we see these climate strikes, climate manifestations, climate demonstration, whatever we would like to call them. The research on these transformations show that they occur now and then, but we seldom know why. They start in a specific year or a specific period and not in other periods. Now such a development might be ongoing under the label of climate, which the public at large consider to be an equivalent to environment. We don't really know why it happened now. It takes different forms in different countries, but it generates a momentum that some political parties in some countries have been able to capitalize on. In other countries, Sweden, for instance, where I come from, we see no sign at all in politics in relation to the demonstration, the size of them. But how can the environmental movement channel and link this huge force among the public that goes in one direction, at least once an hour on Fridays, they go in the same direction, a lot of people, unprecedented in many countries. How can we channel that frustration, ambition, that interest into nitty-gritty details on EU policies? I don't think we have the answer to that question, and that's the $10,000 question, which makes it the elephant in the room. But we have 2 days of annual general meeting where we might be able to come up with an answer, because we do not really know how to do that, how to keep those flames of engagement burning and channeled in the right direction. We haven't been able to accomplish this from civil society ourselves. It happened now. Why did it happen? I think it's very complex. We've been a part of the mobilization under the surface for a very long time, but why did it happen now? And how can we make sure it will continue, and how can we transform that into policies that are more than labels of Green New Deals and things like that? We know how to design those policies, which the masses do not know, but without them, we can't do it. How can we combine these different strengths that we have?
Thanks a lot. There was one more, I think, there. Was there one more? No. No? Any more questions? Well, if that's not the case, is there one more? Okay.
Thank you so much. When it comes to this opportunities, what we can cooperate with people, I think for me it's quite difficult to to do new corporations from that list, because we did all this over the last 20 years already, but maybe it's also good to continue and stress more. I just want to give one thing that relates to the question of include people from outside EU. And it's a specific topic for water. I'm a water policy officer, and that is that in the Balkan states we have a huge impact on biodiversity, on freshwater ecology, by about 2,000 and more hydropower plants that are going to be built there. And I think we got to do something more about this, because in Europe we're thinking about water framework directive and maybe 1% more here, 1% more there, in improving a little bit of our freshwater ecosystems. They have pristine ecosystems, they drink the water from the rivers and everything's perfect, and now we are going to destroy this. And I just want to give an appeal that we have to do something about this and have to prevent this. Thank you.
Thank you. Chapter. This one in the middle.
I'm a little bit apprehensive about perhaps finishing on a rather pessimistic note, but I have to urge vigilance. Many of the messages we heard here today, not just because we're in an old church, we're singing to the choir, but leopards don't change their spots. And the EU Commission is comprised of the member states, as is the EU Council. And today, in talking to colleagues, again and again, I heard horrifying, and I mean truly horrifying, stories about what their governments are doing to compromise the rights in terms of access to justice and participation in environmental decision-making within their countries. Those same governments get on planes, trains and automobiles to go over to Brussels to make decisions and to bring forward the European Green Deal. Are they going to change their spots? I fear not. And I think Mikkel's question to us is very pertinent, because I think there is a lot of rhetoric, I think there is a lot of hope, but I think there is a very, very long way to go to translate the types of messages and initiatives that we have heard about today into something that is going to be real, meaningful transition. If I was to get up and to press the fire alarm, well, first of all, you'd kill me, but then secondly of all, we would all immediately change what we are doing. We would be reacting to an emergency situation, and there is absolutely no reflection of that type of recognition of the extent of emergency that we are facing in the context of climate or in biodiversity in the way our politicians are acting. So vigilance is my last and parting word. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tractor. If there are no more questions, I think, sorry. Well, there's one more poll. I don't know if you already have the results to that one. Well, the most important things that we can do to make a difference. So environmental education and awareness raising and making concrete proposals came out very strongly, as well as addressing climate and biodiversity as two joint crises rather than having two different movements. Also bottom-up mobilization. Well, maybe on a concluding note, and also linking to what Michael has just said, I mean, as EB, we have 2 more days to talk about our strategy over the next, well, years, and the long term. And as part of our movement, and we have representatives of young people mobilizing within our network, and there will be time for more dialogue to talk about how we can kind of harvest better and make sure that the established environmental organizations and those mobilizing on the streets can kind of come together and join forces, well, more forcefully over the next years, because yeah, we need to remain vigilant and not just kind of be too happy about the promises that have been made. So I think that's a message that we take to tomorrow's meeting. But well, I don't want to preclude what Toni will be saying in his concluding words. So we're inviting Toni Vidan to conclude and summarize our conference before our president will formally close the conference. And then the minister should be with us. Toni.
I mean, it's really too heavy burden on my shoulders, so I will really try to share with you more like my impressions of today's conference, but after so eloquent elaboration on the topical things which you listed, Patrizia, and how Michael well put a major challenge in front of the movement, I think we have fair share of conclusions already spelled out. So I will try to just brief you through my subjective perception of what I take from this conference away. First of all, I have strong sense of déjà vu. I was here in March '95 on a first climate convention COP here in Berlin. And the young environment minister from Helmut Kohl government on the end of the conference congratulate the environmental movement as a key player who helped to elaborate a mandate for what would later become Kyoto Protocol. Young minister was, of course, Angela Merkel. So in certain circumstances, we do have impact. And what I carry from this conference is a message from our youth representative. She clearly spelled out, we need information what is going on in Brussels. So grassroots and youth need from us, part of the environmental movement, which is working on European policies, to succeed in somehow clearly communicating to them what the hell is going on in Brussels and what member states are actually doing in that process. Now that's easy to say, but we know how hard that is. And also, obviously, I think it's a clear message that we should, point our strong opinions toward decision makers and provide grassroots with hopefully neutral and competent information, and trust that grassroots and youth, on the basis of information, can develop appropriate strategies for local action. Because we are aware that what function as a campaign in Croatia is definitely probably not working in Sweden. So that is a very important message I heard, and also she was very blunt, guys, be courageous. Let's not think in terms of what is politically feasible from bureaucracy in Brussels. Let's start, being a little bit more in according with the moment of huge opportunity for environmental transition. Let's call things with a real sort of name and grasp a little bit from what we are having now as a huge assistance from the youth. Because obviously in these kind of really chaotic, confusing times of transition, it takes obviously a child to tell, king is naked. So let's learn a little bit from that approach and call things by their real name. Of course, easy to say, hard to achieve. On the Green New Deal, well, obviously expectations are high, but what really I haven't heard, although, okay, there was nobody from Commission here, but did anybody who is actually writing Green Deal for Europe, I would expect that they ask us what should be in it. We generated public pressure which brought political change to the European institutions. Youth was, instrumental in creating green wave which changed the political landscape in Europe. We, instead of Juncker, priorities on deregulation, we now have formal priority for a Green Deal for Europe. But are we asked, as actors which are part of this movement, what should be in it? EIB made a list of the requests, but I think we need to be careful and wait to see what will be in that. And obviously, I'm sure, I think that most of the people gave number 3 on a scale from 1 to 5 in terms of optimism and expectations, but we need to be careful. What was missing in the debate also on a Green Deal, and hopefully it came up in the last panel, was the social aspect of Green Deal for Europe. I mean, my sense is that if that deal will not be just, it will not deliver. So I think this is the area on which we need to hammer, as a lady from Finland said. Solidarity needs to be essence of Green Deal for Europe. And if we don't succeed. If that deal will not deliver on that front, I think that it will be hard for it to deliver. It was interesting for me and very encouraging to hear very smart contributions from the representatives from the industry. I mean, he was calling for regulate. He's expecting European institutions to regulate, which is really refreshing to hear from the industry. And also, what was I was glad to hear, his assessment that heavy, meaning polluting industry, is actually starting to grasp that transition to low carbon economy could be a way to bring jobs back to Europe. I think that is promising aspect. Of course, we shouldn't be too naive, but it is some sort of a venue which could be a bridge for cooperation with the heavy industry. From policy representatives, I heard about the need for the policy coherence, not just targets, but implementation. And, well, it was relatively encouraging to see that Environmental Committee of Parliament is now the biggest committee, so hopefully they will be also most ambitious and smartest. On the presidencies, well, from Austria and Finland, it's interesting that from those presidencies which actually are finished or are in a way, I heard mostly about limitations of presidency as such. Which is obviously, well, to expect. But if I need to send a message to the future presidencies, my little country, Croatia, and Germany, I would say I would like to tell them three messages. One message is strong expectation for sound and ambitious leadership. Second message would be a strong expectation for sound and ambitious leadership. And you might anticipate what would be the third message, strong expectation for sound and ambitious leadership. Topics I don't have time to go through, but this dynamic of how things work in Brussels obviously need to change a bit. Well, with this I would end, and please, I mean, of course, these are not conclusions, but we can build them jointly over the next day or two. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Toni, for concluding. And we also need to mention that we're very glad that Toni came in to support us, given that our Secretary General, Jeremy Waits, is unwell and couldn't come to join us in Berlin. So we're very glad that you could take over the role and do the summary for us. So let me ask Joni, as the President of the EB, to formally close our conference, while we are then waiting for the Environment Minister to join us very soon. Joni.
Thank you. Yes, as Patrizia already said, we thank Toni for giving us this half-improvised concluding remarks. The idea was also that because Croatia is the next presidency country, the next country carrying the torch, so he was bridging the gap between Finland and Sweden, and Germany, sorry. We are in a bit of an interesting situation because I just heard that the German minister will be here just before 6:30, so maybe even a couple of minutes early. So we have kind of little time to fill in here, but I'm a little hesitant to let you go for drinks because. Probably what happens is that the moment you stand up, the minister will be here. But it's not a kindergarten, so it also feels funny to keep you here. But But maybe I just say a couple of concluding remarks, and we hope that she will be here by the time I finish. I'd like to bring up kind of 2 times 3 points about this meeting. Something that I don't want you to walk out from here thinking that the EEB is really very much like in a naive way believing in this Green Deal for Europe. That's not what we put all our money on. It's just a promising initiative, but obviously it is very much about how it is connected to all the other issues that are going on, how the social side of the issues is taken care of, and also how do we connect it to the broader themes like the trade policies, which have a huge impact on both the European environment and on the impact of Europeans to other parts of the world, and also to the broader Sustainable Development Agenda, the UN Sustainable Development Agenda 2030. And also another way to look at this conference is to remember that in addition to the Green Deal for Europe, we have heard about the presidencies, which are very much nation-state driven, and nation states in all our countries, we have the civil society has our own ways to influence the decision makers and kind of help lead the civil society in engaging in a dialogue with the decision makers. And that happens in many countries in slightly different ways, but in all the countries we have long tradition about it. And that's obviously one aspect of shaping the future of Europe. And that's one thing that we should take out from here as well, that also following what Toni said just a little while ago, that the civil society, at best, we do have power and we can influence things, even major developments. But it does not automatically happen that if we just whine about our possibilities to have our voices heard, it might be that we are just heard, but we are not really listened to. So sometimes it really needs a struggle to get our voices heard.
Let's see how it goes.
But at this time, I don't know, maybe the people at the door can give some sign if our last guest will be arriving. But
otherwise.
But at this time, I would still once more thank our facilitators, Patrizia and Patrick. Maybe we can give them a round of applause. But then I would also like to mention 4 more names, because behind the scenes we have a hardworking EEB crew, and I would like to specifically mention Alessia Biasioli, Andrea Gonzalez, Abraham Lombrana, and Emma Ernst as hardworking EEB people. Thank you very much. Emma, did I understand your sign as 10 more minutes, or what was it?
I'm going to tell a joke.
Yeah, I was supposed to tell some finished jokes, but I guess that was already a finished joke. So.
Well, I would propose, because you must be very thirsty.
Yes.
We'll take the risk and we'll let you go to the reception tables. Do grab something to drink, but come back quickly. Let's be disciplined, but go and grab a glass and do come back. Let's make sure we're back in the room when the minister arrives. So thank you very much for your attention, and well, enjoy your drink and come back very soon. Yes. Thank you.
A good idea. Thank you.
Thanks.